hidden beneath Kensington Palace, beneath layers of reinforced steel, and monitored by private security not even the Crown admits to, lies a vault that has become the source of whispered intrigue. This is not fiction. It's where Meghan Markle's most controversial jewels are kept. But why can't she wear them anymore? And who locked them away? Whispers of this vault first surfaced not in the press, but in strained conversations behind palace doors. Insiders speak of a subterranean chamber, unmarked, unnamed, and omitted from official architectural documents. Known only to a small inner circle, it reportedly holds heirlooms that no longer have a clear path of ownership, pieces inherited in silence or shrouded in dispute. It was never meant to be acknowledged, and certainly not meant to be linked to Meghan Markle. But after her departure from royal life, something shifted. Pieces once promised, once worn, once held with pride, began to vanish from sight, and one by one they were locked away. Not in anger, not publicly, but quietly, in a way the monarchy has mastered for centuries. After Meghan and Prince Harry stepped back from their royal duties, what followed was not simply a change in titles or engagements. It was a slow, almost surgical removal of access, particularly when it came to the jewels. According to palace insiders, Meghan's jewelry, especially those that once belonged to Princess Diana, was carefully gathered, logged, and placed into a secured, restricted vault space. No official statements were made. There was no formal withdrawal, but slowly requests were ignored. Approvals, once automatic, were silently declined, and eventually nothing more was said. Behind closed doors at Sandringham, discussions reportedly turned icy. Courtiers, long skeptical of Meghan's place in the monarchy's traditions, argued that her continued use of certain heirlooms would blur protocol and diminish institutional clarity. But others saw it differently. They saw a young woman being slowly erased from the legacy she had briefly stepped into. One aide, speaking anonymously, described the atmosphere in those meetings as deliberately suffocating, where decisions weren't debated. They were handed down like verdicts. And the comparison to Diana was inevitable. After her divorce from Prince Charles, Princess Diana's access to royal jewels was similarly curtailed. But even then, some pieces remained with her, negotiated through personal will and legal agreement. Meghan, on the other hand, wasn't just losing access, she was losing narrative. Diana's jewels had been symbols of resistance and tragedy. Meghan's were becoming something else entirely. Forbidden. The vault's very existence was denied by those at the top. No blueprints, no logs, no public acknowledgement. And yet, former staffers hint at its presence like a phantom in the palace. They speak of a code-protected chamber with biometric access and an air so dry it's monitored hourly. Inside it, tiaras, earrings, brooches, necklaces, some of them ancient, others recent, all of them now untouchable. It was never about the gems themselves, it was about what they represented: power, inclusion, and, above all, approval. To wear royal jewels is to be sanctioned by the monarchy. To be seen without them is to be made invisible by it. Meghan never spoke publicly about the vault, not directly, but sources close to her describe a lingering hurt, a sense that pieces once entrusted to her had been reclaimed, not because she wasn't worthy, but because her independence made others nervous. The jewels were locked away not out of spite, but out of fear. But what exactly is inside the vault? And why have even members of the royal family argued over its contents? Not all jewels glisten with glamour. Some burn with betrayal. Inside the vault lies a tiara said to have sparked shouting matches, cold silences, and one furious phone call between Queen Elizabeth and Harry. This wasn't about diamonds. This was about dominance. The fairy tale of a royal wedding is often written in lace, protocol, and sparkle. But behind the scenes, beneath the surface of that gilded day in May 2018, was a bitter fight over one particular tiara, an ornate, legacy-laced piece that Meghan Markle reportedly wished to wear for her wedding. At first, it was framed as a simple request, a bride choosing the piece she felt most drawn to. But this wasn't just any bride, and this wasn't just any tiara. This was a royal symbol, handpicked not only for elegance, but for message. And when Meghan selected a Cartier heirloom, once worn by a controversial royal figure and never seen in public since, it triggered a confrontation that echoed through Buckingham's deepest halls. According to multiple palace insiders, Meghan had fallen in love with the piece during a private viewing. It was bold, clean-lined, and unmistakably modern. But it also carried a trace of royal scandal, whispered to be linked to a duchess long erased from family lore. The selection was, to many, provocative, almost defiant. And before the Queen could officially approve it, courtiers moved. What followed was a delicate sabotage. Allegedly, the piece was declared unavailable, locked behind sudden repairs, its provenance re-questioned. Meghan was told, politely, that other options were better suited. But what wasn't said spoke louder than what was. The message was clear. She could marry into the institution, but she would not define it. That decision lit the fuse. Harry, incensed, reportedly confronted senior staff. What had been presented as a minor logistical matter unraveled into a palace-wide standoff. And it was then, when tempers flared and diplomacy cracked, that Queen Elizabeth herself was forced to intervene. She made her preference known, that Meghan wear the Queen Mary diamond bandeau, a more traditional choice, seen as safer, less charged, less hers. The Queen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was the final word. The Cartier tiara was never mentioned again in official circles, but its absence lingered. It was never worn, never offered again. And later, according to one source close to the situation, it was quietly transferred into what would become Meghan's sealed vault, no longer accessible, no longer visible, locked behind layers of protocol and unspoken consequence. That episode cast a long shadow over Meghan's final days as a full member of the royal family. As fittings continued, and the world anticipated a royal spectacle, she felt increasingly isolated. Her requests were filtered, her decisions questioned, and above it all hovered the unspoken reality. The jewels she would wear weren't just decorative, they were political. And her choices, unlike others before her, were not entirely hers to make. Then came the words that shattered the illusion of harmony. During one of the mounting clashes over wedding preparations, Harry reportedly exploded at palace aides with a line that would become infamous in royal circles. What Meghan wants, Meghan gets. But in the end, she didn't. Not the tiara she had chosen. Not the autonomy she expected. Not the place in the system that had welcomed her with one hand and quietly restrained her with the other. That moment wasn't about the sparkle on her head. It was about who had the right to decide. And as the dust settled, it became clear. Meghan had walked into a house built on centuries of silent power. And in that house, tradition always had the final say. And yet, the wedding was just the beginning. What happened after was far more explosive, when the jewels became symbols of silence. After the wedding, palace insiders claimed the Queen issued a secret memo, a quiet royal directive listing the jewels Meghan was never to be seen wearing in public. The list was never shown to her, but it changed everything. At first, the shift was subtle. No headlines, no formal announcements, but gradually a pattern began to emerge, one that didn't go unnoticed by those who tracked every photograph, every gesture, every jewel. As Meghan stepped into her new life as a duchess, her appearances grew increasingly bare. No tiaras, no legacy brooches, no earrings tied to Windsor history, not even the occasional borrowed piece that other royals wore as a matter of custom. For a woman who had once stepped into the spotlight with promise and symbolism stitched into every detail, the absence was deafening, and it wasn't a coincidence. Sources close to palace operations point to a document known only among the highest echelons of royal administration, an internal directive, never meant for outside eyes, allegedly drawn up under the Queen's own instruction. It was not a declaration, it was a list of specific jewels deemed inappropriate for future public use by the Duchess of Sussex. The phrase itself, reportedly buried deep in formal language, was ambiguous enough to escape scrutiny, but powerful enough to draw a line in stone. This list, they say, was held not by the Queen herself, but by the master of the jewel house, an ancient role with the quiet authority to say yes, no, or not now. And Meghan, despite her title, despite her role, was no longer in the column marked yes. The reasoning? At face value, it was dressed in diplomacy. The Queen, according to aides, wished to avoid misinterpretation. She was said to be mindful of protocol tension as the family adjusted to Meghan's modern, unconventional presence. But beneath the surface, the subtext rang louder: control, public image, lineage, and the unspoken rule that not all members of the family are equal, especially when one of them had already begun to challenge the system from within. The contrast grew starker as the months went on. Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, stepped into the spotlight in glittering continuity. The Cambridge lover's knot, Queen Mary's brooch, earrings once worn by the Queen Mother, each piece a thread in the unbroken royal fabric. Meghan, by comparison, began appearing in her own jewelry. New designs, understated elegance, lacking institutional memory. She wasn't just being separated in protocol, she was being symbolically erased. For Meghan, it was more than a fashion limitation. It was emotional exile. Behind palace doors, she was reportedly devastated, cut off from the symbols of belonging, treated as if she were a guest in a house where inheritance was currency, and she had none to spend. Friends describe her as feeling singled out, like she was being told she didn't count. The message was subtle, but clear. Tradition would not be reshaped to fit her. She was expected to reshape herself to fit tradition. And then came the twist no one expected. The list, according to one former courtier, included a final clause, rumored, never confirmed, and yet whispered about with unease. A clause that stated any pieces directly inherited from Princess Diana would be subject to special review. Not revoked, not denied outright, but flagged, questioned, monitored. A painful echo of the past, because if Diana's legacy was being policed again, it meant the monarchy was still terrified of what it represented. As her access narrowed, Meghan's relationship with the royal machine deteriorated. But then came the ultimate twist, a gift from Diana that no one expected. It was found in a simple velvet pouch left in a safety deposit box in California after Harry and Meghan's move. A necklace that belonged to Diana, never catalogued, never displayed, and mysteriously vanished within weeks. The pouch was unmarked. The chain inside, delicate, understated, carried a single sapphire surrounded by a sunburst of tiny diamonds. It wasn't part of any royal registry. No public photographs existed. But Harry knew exactly what it was. He had seen it once, long ago, when he was just a boy. His mother had worn it during a holiday away from the cameras, one of the few moments she wasn't performing. It had been left to him in private, outside the legal bindings of official estate papers, and now, years later, it was his to give. Not to an institution, not to a museum, but to the woman he loved, far from the palace that had turned cold. He gave it to Meghan without ceremony, in the quiet of a new life. There were no cameras, no press releases. She wore it once, just once, during an evening in Montecito, where no one could see her. No royal rules to follow, no protocols to satisfy. Just a gesture of love, tied to a memory, glowing with meaning. But that quiet moment would not last. When the couple began to transition their lives to America, the process was not just emotional, it was logistical chaos. Items were moved, stored, reassessed. Jewelry, like everything else, required protection. The velvet pouch was placed in a secure California safety deposit box, alongside other personal heirlooms, according to a trusted source. And then, without explanation, it was gone. No break-in, no signs of forced entry, just missing. What followed was confusion, then panic, then disbelief. Meghan reportedly searched through every secured item they'd relocated. Nothing. Staff were questioned. Vault logs reviewed. The velvet pouch never reappeared. A formal inquiry was never launched. Not publicly, at least. But inside their circle, suspicions grew. Was it stolen, or was it taken? Because this wasn't just any necklace. It was Diana's, unrecorded, untraceable, unclaimed by any official body, which meant that whoever took it wouldn't have to explain. There was no public inventory to account for it, no royal documentation, just a piece of personal memory, erased. Theories swirled. Some whispered that a rogue staff member had taken advantage of the chaos. Others believed the timing was too perfect, too precise, that it wasn't an accident at all, that the crown, or those acting in its shadow, had intervened, quietly reclaiming what it viewed as its own. A reminder, perhaps, that Diana's legacy would not be allowed to pass freely, especially not into Meghan's hands. For Meghan, the loss was deeply personal. This wasn't a diamond meant for display. It was a thread to a woman she'd never met, but felt spiritually connected to. A woman who had walked the same tightrope, lived under the same microscope, and ultimately paid the same price. That necklace was more than jewelry. It was protection, proof, a silent rebellion. Harry's reaction, according to those close to him, was incandescent. He had promised it. He had passed it on. And now, once again, something sacred had been taken from the woman he loved. Just like before. Just like always. And yet, what haunted them more than its disappearance was the silence that followed. No explanation. No admission. Nothing. As if it had never existed. But they knew the truth. And that truth carved a deeper wedge between them and the institution they had once trusted. If Diana's gift was taken, what else had been removed from Meghan's grasp? As it turns out, the vault was far more crowded than anyone knew. Buried in royal ledgers and estate files are items no one will officially acknowledge. Heirlooms tied to political scandals, family betrayals, and forbidden unions. Some of these now sit in Meghan's vault, and no one knows why. Among the inventory of crown jewels, there exists another realm entirely. A shadow archive, pieces that never make the public catalogue, never appear in coronations or jubilees. Brooches whose origins trace back to affairs whispered about but never confirmed. Earrings passed through the hands of exiled duchesses. rings gifted in secret, then hidden to protect reputations. These are not the jewels that define royal lineage. They are the ones that threaten it. And somehow, inexplicably, a handful of them are believed to have found their way into Meghan Markle's possession. How? That question has haunted royal insiders since the first murmurs emerged. According to a source who once worked within the master of the jewel house, Meghan was given access to a set of these unregistered heirlooms not through paperwork, but through a quiet directive, a verbal instruction from Queen Elizabeth herself. No signatures, no ceremony, just a discreet conversation, relayed through a trusted aide, authorizing the Duchess to retain a few select items. They were never meant for display. They were meant, allegedly, as a gesture. Perhaps even a warning. Among the pieces was said to be a brooch, rumored to have belonged to Wallis Simpson, an artifact never worn since Edward VIII abdicated the throne. Another, a set of emerald earrings tied to a scandal involving a royal cousin and a foreign government, locked away since the 1950s. These were not pieces chosen for their beauty. They carried weight, symbolism, baggage. Not everyone was pleased. Camilla, now queen consort, reportedly bristled when she learned certain heirlooms had been passed on without her knowledge. Princess Anne, a fierce guardian of royal tradition, questioned the message it sent. To them, these pieces weren't gifts. They were liabilities. And giving them to Meghan, a figure already surrounded by controversy, felt like lighting a fuse and handing her the match. But Meghan saw it differently. To her, the items were not threats. They were truths. Each piece represented a woman who had been cast aside, silenced, or punished for defying the palace script. They weren't symbols of scandal. They were warnings written in gold and gemstone. Meghan reportedly believed that Elizabeth, who had ruled through decades of crisis and calculation, was sending a message. You're not the first, and you're not alone. Yet the gesture came with a cruel twist, because as tensions escalated between Meghan and the firm, the very pieces given in private trust were quietly reclaimed. Not forcibly, not with confrontation, but with subtlety. A note about preservation, a request for safekeeping, a shift in access permissions, and once again, the jewels slipped from her grasp. Locked behind doors she no longer held the keys to. What remained was the emotional fallout. To be entrusted with royal ghosts, only to have them locked away, was more than a logistical loss. It was spiritual. Meghan had held these symbols of female rebellion and royal vulnerability in her hands. She had seen the weight they carried. And then they were taken, leaving behind not silence, but a deepening sense of exile. But this wasn't just about jewelry. It was about what she represented, and the power she wasn't supposed to have. When Meghan stepped back from royal duties, the palace didn't just revoke titles, it quietly revoked access. Every request to wear or display inherited jewels was met with silence. The message was clear. You walked away. So did your rights. It began not with a scandal, but with a silence. After Meghan and Harry announced their decision to step away from full-time royal life, the monarchy's response was icy but calculated. Titles were reworded, patronages removed. But in the background, something even more symbolic was quietly unfolding. Access to royal jewels, once considered ceremonial, inherited, unquestioned, was suddenly no longer guaranteed. Requests that had once been met with swift approval were now being routed, delayed, ignored altogether. No official denial, no explanation, just absence, an invisible wall rising around the very symbols that once welcomed her in. At first, it was subtle. Meghan, slated to appear at a UN Women's Initiative, had asked to wear a pair of diamond earrings gifted to her during a Commonwealth tour. They were modest by royal standards, but meaningful. The request was never acknowledged. Later, when planning to headline a charity gala focused on British veterans, Meghan suggested wearing a brooch that once belonged to Princess Alice, one she had worn previously with quiet pride. The brooch never arrived. No one followed up. To the outside world, these absences might have seemed trivial, but inside the palace machinery, they were a message. Meghan, once granted the visible trappings of royal inclusion, was now being edited out. Not with public disgrace, but with private erasure. And behind the scenes, the struggle intensified. Harry, deeply protective and increasingly furious, reportedly raised the matter directly with Charles, arguing that these pieces were personal family gifts, not institutional property. Charles, now operating with the full weight of future kingship, disagreed. He insisted that royal jewels, particularly those tied to past sovereigns, were not personal effects. They were symbols. And symbols, in his words, had to be guarded carefully. The back and forth grew tense, not loud, but cutting. According to palace aides, Charles feared the optics of Meghan wearing certain heirlooms post-Megexit. He worried it would confuse the public, that her appearances in legacy pieces would suggest an ongoing endorsement by the crown. To Charles, this was about control, image, continuity. To Harry, it was about family, memory, fairness. The argument went nowhere. Caught in the middle was Meghan, no longer a working royal, but still very much a woman in the spotlight. And as her access narrowed, so did her willingness to play the game. The more she was ignored, the less she asked. Eventually, she stopped requesting anything at all. But it wasn't without cost. Behind the polished smiles and polished appearances, Meghan was unraveling. Not just from the rejection, but from what it represented. She had once been told she was part of the family, that she was welcomed, that she belonged. And now, piece by piece, that belonging was being undone. Not with confrontation, but with cold formality. The jewels, once offered as symbols of legacy and trust, were now being used as barriers. Not because she had broken protocol, but because she had broken free. Insiders describe her final months as a slow realization that her identity had never truly been her own within the institution. That everything she wore, said, or touched had been filtered through a lens of legacy she had no control over. And when she chose to reclaim her voice, they chose to reclaim their tokens. Her decision to stop asking wasn't surrender. It was survival. But even as she backed away from the spotlight, the crown didn't just stop at refusal. It took the next step, one that made the silence permanent. And then came the final lock, the moment the jewels weren't just denied, but hidden behind reinforced steel. In a silent act, without announcement or ceremony, a security team removed Meghan's jewels from display and sealed them within a vault, accessible only to the crown. The Duchess wasn't informed until weeks later. It happened with precision. Not during a scandal, not amid public outcry, but in the stillness of bureaucratic efficiency. Palace aides received instructions through a chain of command so discreet it left no trace on paper. Select pieces, necklaces, earrings, brooches, each with some connection to Meghan's brief and tumultuous chapter within the monarchy, were retrieved by royal security under orders said to have originated from the very top. No press release, no internal memo circulated among staff. Just one quiet operation, executed like the closing of a book the crown no longer wanted read. The timing was no accident. It occurred just weeks after Meghan and Harry's final round of transition talks. talks that had soured, according to insiders, when Harry asked for clarity on what, if anything, Meghan would retain from her time as a working royal. There was no direct refusal, just ambiguity. And then, days later, the vault was sealed. To the public, nothing changed. There was no announcement, no symbolic act of retraction. Meghan still appeared on covers, still engaged with causes, still smiled when cameras caught her. But behind the scenes, a single line was reportedly sent to her legal team. Items held in trust until resolution of status. Cold, clinical, detached. The kind of phrase engineered not to spark reaction, but to signal finality. According to a friend close to Meghan, the moment she found out broke her. Not because of the jewels themselves, but because of what they meant. Each piece had represented something earned, a gesture of belonging in a world that had always made her feel like an outsider. Now, even those symbolic threads had been cut. She was devastated. Not angry, not surprised, just done. Harry, however, was not. In a private communication, he is said to have issued an ultimatum to senior palace officials. Either the items be returned to Meghan's possession, or an official explanation be made public. The response was brutally brief. The jewels, he was told, were held by the institution. That phrase, the institution, rang with all the weight of centuries. No person to argue with, no face to confront. Just a system that absorbs all blame while offering none of itself. What the world was told in that time painted a different picture entirely. The press ran with glowing retrospectives of Meghan's royal wardrobe, speculating about her next appearance, her style evolution, her new freedom. But none of them knew that the doors to her history had been locked behind a steel wall, and that even she was no longer permitted inside. That vault, now sealed by layers of protocol and reinforced authority, doesn't just contain jewels. It holds the echoes of promises revoked, identities rewritten, and status erased. It is not a storage space. It is a message hidden in plain sight. And yet, whispers suggest the vault isn't just sealed for security. It's a weapon, and the war may not be over. What if Meghan opened the vault? What if she wore the forbidden tiara? Palace aides fear more than bad press. They fear precedent, exposure, and the crumbling of an empire built on inheritance and image. That's why the vault must stay locked, because deep beneath the issue of access lies a legal question so murky, so volatile, it's rarely spoken aloud. Who really owns the jewels? Are they private gifts? State property? Personal tokens passed through generations? Or are they symbols, bound not by ownership, but by narrative, legacy, and the tight grip of monarchy? For most royals, the answer doesn't matter. They are born inside the system, protected by it, complicit in it. But Meghan was never one of them, and in her hands the jewels represent something far more disruptive than glamour. They represent choice. That's what terrifies the crown. Because if Meghan were to open the vault, if she were to step out in the pieces they locked away, the ones denied to her without explanation, she wouldn't just be wearing jewels. She'd be reclaiming a version of herself the monarchy worked tirelessly to erase. Every gemstone, every brooch, every tiara would tell a story they no longer control. Not the institution. Not the palace. Her. And in a world hungry for authenticity, for rebellion cloaked in dignity, that image would be unstoppable. Not royal rebellion from within, but royal truth told from the outside. A duchess no longer sanctioned, no longer silenced, stepping forward not with vengeance, but with history in her hands. What Meghan wears next isn't just a fashion choice. It's a threat. That's why, behind closed doors, the tension is rising. Courtiers worry that the vault isn't just a repository of diamonds. It's a political minefield. A single piece worn at the wrong time, in the wrong context, could unravel years of carefully guarded neutrality. A pair of earrings at an interview, a bracelet at a public appearance, a tiara in a single, silent photo. All it would take is one gesture, and the palace would lose control of the narrative it has curated for decades. And while Meghan remains publicly silent, her silence itself has become strategic. Every unanswered question, every sidestepped interview, every deliberate absence of detail only fuels speculation, and with it, sympathy. The public is shifting. Once curious, now skeptical. Once divided, now increasingly on her side. Because silence, when done right, speaks louder than any statement. And yet, there is one rumor, circulating in private circles, whispered with dread, that refuses to die. That Meghan may not open the vault through lawyers, or statements, or battles over wills. That one day, without warning, she could open it on camera. Live, unfiltered. A global audience watching not just the unveiling of jewels, but the unraveling of secrets. A silent exhibition of everything the monarchy tried to suppress, presented not with rage, but with poise, with purpose. And that's what they fear the most. Not scandal, not rebellion, exposure. But the question remains, was this ever really about jewels, or something far more dangerous? They silenced her, locked her legacy away, and told the world she wasn't royal enough to wear the past. But Meghan still holds one thing the crown fears most, the key to a narrative they can't control. And inside that vault lies the story of everything they tried to hide. Now, as rumors swirl about a forthcoming memoir, her version of events, the crown holds its breath. Not because of what she might say, but because of what she might show. One image, one artifact, one piece pulled from the shadows of that vault could unravel years of myth-making. What if she did it on her terms? What if the tiara they denied her reappeared not in a royal portrait, but on the cover of Truth? There is power in restraint, but there is revolution in revelation. And that's the question the monarchy can't answer. What happens if Meghan reclaims what was taken, not through litigation or ceremony, but through symbolism? What if she wore them now? What would it mean? To the institution, to the public, to history? Could the crown survive the truth if it sparkled in front of the cameras? Because this was never just about diamonds. It never was. It's about a woman, a legacy, and the price of walking away from the palace and daring to speak.